In the seemingly peaceful town, where everyone knew each other and life moved at a slower pace, an unspeakable scandal was brewing behind the closed doors of a high school. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and secrets had no place to hide. But this was no ordinary secret. It was a story of lust, betrayal, and murder that no one could have imagined. At the center of it all was 42-year-old Daniel Bennett, a well-respected teacher who had been at Central High for nearly 2 decades. To his students, he was a beacon of knowledge, a mentor who took extra time to ensure their success. But beneath his calm, professional exterior, there was something much darker at play. And then there was Emily Parker. At just 17, Emily was the picture-perfect high school senior, bright, ambitious, and eager to escape the confines of her small town. She had her whole life ahead of her, with dreams of attending college in a big city and leaving high school behind forever. But what no one knew was that Emily's future would be intertwined with the man who was supposed to guide her academically, Daniel Bennett. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. Daniel Bennett had noticed Emily during her junior year. She was smart, curious, and always engaged in class discussions. Her essays were eloquent, her questions thoughtful, and she showed promise as one of the school's brightest students. Daniel, who prided himself on nurturing talent, began to give her extra attention. At first, it was purely academic. After class tutoring sessions, discussions about her future, and recommendations for college. Emily was flattered by the attention from her teacher. He wasn't like the other adults in her life. He listened to her, really listened, in a way her peers didn't. Soon, their conversations grew more personal. Daniel confided in Emily about his frustrations with his marriage, telling her how unhappy he was, how his wife no longer understood him. Emily, naive and impressionable, saw this as a sign of trust. She had never been in love before, but as she spent more time with Daniel, her feelings for him deepened. By the time summer rolled around, their relationship had crossed the line from professional to personal. Late-night texts turned into secret meetings, and those meetings soon became physical. Daniel, fully aware of the boundaries he was crossing, justified his actions to himself. He convinced himself that he and Emily were soulmates, that they had found something special, something worth the risk. But affairs built on deception and lies rarely end well, and this one was no different. As the new school year began, Emily and Daniel continued their affair in secret. They met in hidden spots around town, his car, a secluded park, even his office at school after hours. They lived for the thrill of their secret rendezvous, the adrenaline rush of knowing they could be caught at any moment. To the outside world, they maintained the facade of a teacher and his favorite student, but behind closed doors, their relationship grew increasingly intense and increasingly dangerous. Emily, caught up in the intensity of her first love, began to fantasize about a future with Daniel. She dreamed of the day when he would leave his wife, when they could be together openly without fear of judgment. But Daniel was more pragmatic. He knew the consequences of their affair. He could lose his job, his reputation, his family. And yet, he couldn't stop. The danger escalated when Daniel's wife, Rachel Bennett, began to grow suspicious. Rachel had noticed a change in her husband over the past few months. He was distant, distracted, and often came home late without explanation. She had initially brushed it off as stress from work, but as time went on, her intuition told her something wasn't right. Rachel's suspicions deepened when she found a string of text messages on Daniel's phone. The messages were from an unsaved number, but the flirty tone was unmistakable. Rachel confronted Daniel, who dismissed her concerns as paranoia. He assured her that there was nothing going on, that she was overreacting. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She began to dig deeper, asking around at the school, paying closer attention to Daniel's schedule, and even following him on occasion. What she uncovered shocked her to the core. One crisp autumn evening, Rachel decided to follow Daniel after he left the house, claiming he had a late meeting at school. She parked her car a few blocks away from the school and waited in the shadows. As the minutes ticked by, her heart raced. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew she had to know the truth. Just after 9 p.m., Rachel saw the headlights of another car approaching. It was Emily Parker. She watched in horror as Emily parked her car and slipped into the side entrance of the school. Moments later, Daniel followed. Rachel's worst fears had been confirmed. Her husband was having an affair with a student. Enraged, Rachel stormed into the school, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. She knew exactly where they would be, Daniel's office. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door. Inside, she found Daniel and Emily in a compromising position, their faces frozen in shock at the sight of her. "What the hell is going on here?" Rachel screamed, her voice cracking with fury. Emily, terrified, tried to cover herself as Daniel scrambled to explain. But there was no explanation that could undo the damage that had been done. Rachel's world had been shattered, and she was determined to make both of them pay for it. After Rachel's discovery, everything began to unravel. Daniel tried to salvage his marriage, but Rachel was unforgiving. She filed for divorce and threatened to expose his affair to the school board. Emily, meanwhile, was devastated. She had thought she was in love, but now she realized the depth of the betrayal. She had been used, manipulated by a man she trusted. The affair became the talk of the town. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone in town knew about the scandal. Emily's parents, who had initially been unaware of the relationship, were furious. They demanded that Daniel be held accountable for his actions. The school board launched an investigation, and Daniel was placed on administrative leave. His career, his reputation, and his life were crumbling around him. He knew he was on the verge of losing everything, and in his desperation he made a series of fateful decisions that would lead to the ultimate betrayal. One evening, after weeks of mounting pressure, Daniel called Emily and asked her to meet him at a secluded spot on the edge of town. He told her he wanted to talk, to explain everything and make things right. Emily, still holding on to the hope that they could somehow be together, agreed. They met in the woods just after sunset. The air was thick with tension as they stood face to face, their eyes locking in a silent battle of emotions. Emily was hurt, confused, and desperate for answers. Daniel, on the other hand, was a man on the brink of collapse. As they talked, the conversation grew heated. Emily accused Daniel of using her, of ruining her life. Daniel, feeling trapped and cornered, tried to defend himself, but his words only made things worse. The argument escalated until, in a fit of rage, Daniel grabbed a nearby rock and struck Emily across the head. She fell to the ground, unconscious. Panicking, Daniel realized what he had done. In that moment, he made the fateful decision to finish what he had started. He couldn't risk Emily waking up and telling the world what had happened. He couldn't let his life fall apart any more than it already had. With trembling hands, Daniel picked up the rock again and delivered the final, fatal blow. Emily Parker was dead. Daniel stood over Emily's lifeless body, his mind racing. He knew he had to get rid of the evidence, to make it look like an accident or a random attack. He dragged her body deeper into the woods and covered her with leaves and branches, hoping no one would find her. But the guilt was too much for Daniel to bear. He returned home that night, covered in dirt and blood, unable to shake the image of Emily's broken body from his mind. His wife was gone, his career was over, and now he was a murderer. Days passed, and Emily's parents reported her missing. The town was in an uproar, and a search party was organized to find the missing girl. It wasn't long before Emily's body was discovered. Daniel's descent into madness didn't end with Emily's death. He was arrested after a few days of relentless investigation by local authorities, his calm and composed facade giving way to cracks. During his interrogation, Daniel's mental state became evident to the detectives who had been working tirelessly to solve Emily Parker's murder. His confessions were disjointed, filled with pauses and bursts of emotion, as if his mind was a twisted mess, fractured by guilt and panic. At first, he tried to lie his way out, claiming that Emily had attacked him in a fit of rage, accusing him of ruining her life, and in the struggle, she had fallen and hit her head. It was an argument, Daniel said, that escalated beyond his control, but the investigators weren't buying it. The evidence pointed to premeditated violence. Blood spatter, the way the scene had been staged. It didn't fit Daniel's desperate narrative of a heated argument gone wrong. When his lies unraveled, Daniel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably in the sterile interrogation room. He confessed to everything, admitting that in a moment of sheer panic, he had killed Emily to protect himself from exposure. He claimed that the affair, while misguided, was born out of mutual love. He hadn't meant for it to end in tragedy, but his words rang hollow to those who heard them. The town, once a quiet and unsuspecting community, was now a swirl of rumors, accusations, and media attention. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? How had a man with such a vile capacity for manipulation and violence flown under the radar, escaping suspicion while he preyed upon a vulnerable student? The trial of Daniel Bennett became a spectacle, capturing national attention as it unfolded. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal experts, and townspeople who wanted to see justice served. The prosecution laid out a damning case, painting Daniel as a manipulative predator who had preyed on Emily's innocence, and then, when his lies threatened to catch up with him, had killed her in cold blood to silence her forever. Emily's family sat in the front row, their faces pale and drawn, as they listened to the gruesome details of their daughter's murder. Her mother sobbed quietly, clutching a photograph of Emily that had been taken just months before her death, bright-eyed and full of hope. That image of the smiling girl was a stark contrast to the horror of what had happened. The defense tried to argue that Daniel was a broken man, pushed to the edge by years of emotional turmoil in his marriage and struggling to cope with his midlife crisis. They portrayed him as someone who had lost control, who had made a terrible mistake but was not inherently evil. But this argument held little weight against the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and the brutality of Emily's death. Witnesses were called to the stand, students who had noticed the strange dynamic between Daniel and Emily, teachers who had turned a blind eye to his favoritism, and experts who testified to the psychological manipulation involved in grooming a young girl for an affair. It became clear that Daniel had taken advantage of his position of authority and trust to fulfill his twisted desires. As the trial dragged on, it became apparent that Daniel's story was crumbling. His cold and calculated actions, both during and after the crime, left no room for doubt about his guilt. His fate was sealed the moment the jury returned with their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. When the judge handed down the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, there was a collective sigh of relief from Emily's family. But no amount of legal justice could bring back their daughter or erase the trauma they had endured. Emily Parker's name became synonymous with tragedy, her story a cautionary tale for young girls everywhere. And as for Daniel Bennett, he languished in prison, his once promising life reduced to a series of lonely, monotonous days. In the eyes of the world, he was a monster, but in his own twisted mind, he still believed he had loved Emily, still believed they had shared something special. But that delusion offered him little comfort as he faced the rest of his life behind bars, knowing that his actions had destroyed everything and everyone he had once cared about. Daniel Bennett had never imagined that the rest of his life would be spent in a small, cold prison cell, surrounded by nothing but the echoes of his own thoughts. In the sterile monotony of prison, time became irrelevant. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually years passed without any meaningful change. He had no friends here, no allies, only the hollow silence that accompanied him wherever he went. He became a ghost of the man he once was, his once sharp intellect dulled by the weight of his guilt and the crushing reality of his situation. Daniel Bennett's lust and selfishness had led him down a path from which there was no return, and in the process, he had destroyed everything he once held dear. For those left behind, the pain of Emily's death would never truly fade. It would linger in the hearts of her family, her friends, and for the people, a constant reminder that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us in the end. Bottom of form.